Barber Shop Podcast, episode number 38, Ryan?
38?
38, or is it 39?
No, this is 38.
This is number 38, which
For sure this time.
In numerology, that's got to be some sort of kick-ass number. And I am going absolutely sleeveless tonight in honor of our guests that we have in the studio tonight. We have what I consider to be a fantastic guest as far as the format of this show goes, Mr. Glen, a.k.a. the Hamilton Kid, a longtime contributor and supporter, and almost the founder league in this town, supporting music and kinds of music that are quite often branded, very specifically Hamilton. He's a big booster of the city, and looking forward to hearing some of his music and some of his insights on what's going on in the world. Glen, welcome to the Barber Shop Podcast.
Thanks very much.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Ryan, I always reference you because you're a fairly young guy, but you like aggressive music, don't you? And it's like probably raised on, we were talking about commercial radio versus, and I don't want to call it eclectic, but it's for a specific audience. It was difficult to get certain types of music, especially in the days when the internet wasn't around and it wasn't available. And I had to kind of slog it the hard way because my sister liked, Barbra Streisand and ABBA and things like that. So I had to kind of come up through school. Glen has been, a lover and a performer of punk music and, I'm sure ska, black, white, a lot of, associated music forms, over the years. And I'm interested because you brought in some vinyl. I asked you to bring some old stuff. He said, well, I got it on vinyl. I said, well, break out the old Gerard, and we're going to listen to some vinyl tonight, some of the things that inspired you on the way up. I want you to tell us a little bit about how you came into music. Everyone has a slightly similar but very different story about how music became so important in their life, and that's why they're here.
Right.
How did not only music, but the kind of music that you love come into your life at an early age?
Well, I guess I always liked music. Big thing at my house when I was a kid was mom cleaning on a Sunday, and CHML was permanently on in our house for about 20 years, or I caught about 20 years of it. And on Sundays there used to be Moldy Goldie and Hardy show, and they'd play I think CHML only played old stuff, but they'd be playing old 50s and 60s stuff, and on the big stereo in the living room, and I could crank it up a little bit and mom wouldn't mind, and I could jump around or stick my head in the speaker or whatever, and that was probably kind of the beginning. Johnny Horton, Sink the Bismarck and stuff like that, Machine Gun Drums, and then got a little bit older. Everybody else gets into music too, like because you're a cool kid or trying to be a cool kid or something.
You identify yourself and you have your tribe, as I like to call it
exactly
today.
What tribe are you going to join? And all the girls were nuts for Duran Duran at the time, and they were okay, I guess, but I don't know. Grade 8, I remember the teacher got us to bring in our favorite record or something, and so all these girls brought in Duran Duran and stuff like that, Adam and the Ants maybe, and I brought in my mom's Beatlemania record and played like Twist and Shout or something, and that was the only thing that everybody in the room, including more than one teachers, everybody seemed to like it. And you're sure your mom said it was okay for you to bring this in? Oh yeah. But then like for punk, then I go into high school, and I don't know. Well, I doubt if I had any kind of adult fun in grade 9, but in grade 10, started drinking a bit and went to my first school dance, or high school dance, and there was people slam dancing and skipping around in a circle and stuff to a couple songs. and there was rap stuff and you know, the top 40 playing, I guess. But I found that really interesting, curious, where people were being pretty physical with each other, and the music sounded cool too. And so then, like, the next day or the next week, I was asking, what was a song that was playing when everybody was all jumping around? Oh, that's The Clash. That was Should I Stay or Should I Go? Oh, okay, that's interesting. Because I sort of grew up as a hockey player. I was a defenseman. And so this was kind of right up my alley. I like hitting people.
Yeah, and it's for the most
like
part,
within reason.
yeah.
You know, I'm not taking anybody's head off. I'm not going to draw a penalty or anything, but I like being physical. So that was kind of the progression, I guess. And I don't know, me and pretty much the core group of friends that I've had, some of them since kindergarten, everybody, music's pretty important to them. And a lot of them are players, whether they're just in the bedroom or on a stage. But I don't know, it's a big deal, I think. Music, it's a big part of my life, and can't exactly say why, I suppose. I think it's more exciting than pork belly reports or the stock market or something.
Yeah, I think music has always been really important, but it tends to get overlooked because it becomes background music to a lot of people, as opposed to being a charter or something that they follow.
Yeah.
I think when we're young, we're very impassioned about things, and you know, some of the first things that separate us from our parents and from what we learned was what kind of music.
That's right.
And for me, it was absolutely, you know, the aggression and the sound of, you know, bands like Kiss or whatever. And when I saw Teenage Head at 15, that was the first band that I got to see, and that excitement and that palpitation that goes through the crowd, you know, at that age, especially if you're pre-sexual, you know, you need a release you know, for your energies. And that was and if it's not fighting, it's dancing with little action. Now you're from Hamilton, born and raised. You're third generation steelworker at what we'll still call Stelco. Steel Company of Canada,
as opposed to the evil whose name cannot be spoken.
Not be spoken on this show, no. And this town has undergone, or is undergoing, a bit of a identity crisis, metamorphosis, because we knew what we were. Everyone would identify us. But from the very early days, this was a hotbed of music, good local music coming out. Do you remember who some of the first local bands that you heard who totally blew your mind?
Forgotten Rebels. Rebels is the only one, really. I'm not sure at what point I became aware of Teenage Head, but I don't think I would be amiss in saying, if you grew up in Hamilton and you were inclined to exciting music, 70s, 80s, and I suppose early 90s, you're either a Teenage Head fan or you're a Rebels fan. Like, primarily. You might like the other band too, but you like one better than the other. And I suppose if I had been more inclined to the Ramones, then I might have become a Teenage Head fan. But like I mentioned, first I listened to The Clash, then The Pistols, and then the third band was The Exploited. I think I was still in grade 10, and some people were saying, do you like punk rock? And I go, well, so far I do. Well, there's this band playing at Ducky's downtown. And I go, well, what's Ducky's? And I never did go. I was never there, but as far as I know, it was an all-ages club right across the street from Texas Border or Club 77, or whatever you want to call it, on King William there. And apparently The Exploited played an all-ages show there. But I hadn't been downtown on my own yet or anything like that, so I didn't go. But the name was in the forefront of my mind. And so when I went into cheapies or something, then I bought an Exploited tape, and that was my first non-Clash or Pistols punk purchase, and the love affair has never ended.
Yeah, and I have to say, like, you're a very intelligent, well-read, educated guy, and
Thank you.
and what comes with that is social responsibility and being politicized to a certain extent. Now, punk music is known straight up as being, socially aware and political music.
Yep.
Was that something that, you had already started feeling and acting in that manner, or did you find that this was almost like fuel for your fire, that when you started becoming a fan of this music, now you started becoming more social aware of things like injustice and the evils of capitalism? And
well, it was totally in line already with my line of thinking, like, to do with the way I was raised and my age at the time, like the fact that my dad worked at Stelco and my mom's dad worked at Stelco, so like I heard about kind of the politics and whatever of steel mills and Canada in general from a very early age. And it's hard for me to compare because I didn't grow up as a different person, but I've been told that at different time, or I guess growing up, I didn't have as many peers as other kids did, that I spent more time with adults than the average kid, I guess. And so I might be playing with my Tonka truck on the floor, but I am on the floor listening and trying to comprehend what the grown-ups are talking about. But both my parents are pretty political people, and they've got some pretty hardcore views. To a certain extent are their own, but I know there are like-minded souls out there. But not necessarily paying attention to what the news says or trying to read through what the news says was something that was kind of taught to me pretty early. And that's what punk rock's supposed to be about. And not just taking it, not just eating the pablum, but going out and making your own sandwich or something.
And I find it's a bit of a fine line, because people quite often don't want a political message with their music, or that's all they want from their music. And to do so, you have to be enraged. I mean, you have to be legitimately upset and writing from the heart, as opposed to expecting people to, during your syrupy song, then have your political message. It's like you put your money where your mouth is, and you make your song your political message, and you make it something that I would dance to or listen to, anyway. But at the end of the day, if I'm a 15-year-old kid, I wake up the next day with a slightly different perspective. And for me, I was 18. I listened again to it, and nothing against classic rock, as you said, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
It's what was available. It was what was on radio. Yeah. And the offshoots, when you start discovering that, and that's the joy. But
also punk for me was also trying to differentiate myself from my parents too. Mm-hmm. My dad's an immigrant. He didn't like the Beatles. He's seen Nana Muscuri live probably 7 or 8 times. All free, but and my mom was a huge Beatles fan. Her and her younger sister they were part of the fan club and stuff until they went weird, and that was the end of that. Yeah. So by listening to, Mom could sort of handle the Clash to a certain extent, but like the Pistols and the Exploited and whatever, it was like, what is, you gotta worry your parents a little bit, otherwise extent. You're not doing due diligence. You're not growing up properly, I don't think.
Yeah, you feel that there's I guess rap would have taken the torch, as it were, as far as being the music today that the kids listen to, that unabashedly has a social conscience. Do you feel that there's a future for punk music? You see a lot of young punk bands who come in.
Yep.
What do you see? Do you see that as like a later generation kind of Green Day slicked up version of punk, or do you think there's a real core of what made punk
Well, like there's lots of people out there, right? And so there's kind of room for everything. Like rap is certainly, or dance music or whatever, certainly permeated most things. But there's kids that blow through Hamilton or are trying to come up through Hamilton, and they're playing all sorts of different stuff, surfy type punk stuff, like real screamo, like there's screamo metal bands and whatever, like there's also all kinds of stuff. It all depends on your particular taste, right? So I don't think punk will ever go away. I don't think it'll everyone I think punk is unusual in that, at this point anyways, where it's a youth movement, but to some or many, the older you are, the cooler you are, because you're still with it and you were around back when it was harder to be a punk, or you caught a lot more flack for it. Yeah, like if you walk through Gage Park or something, it's probably not that big a deal to see a little kindergarten kid with a mohawk. Mm-hmm. But in 1985, radical. You never saw that, right?
That's true.
If I have actually heard of situations in the 80s where a guy walking down the street in Hamilton with a mohawk causes car accidents.
Wow. Yeah. It was. I remember going across from Ivor Wynnett Stadium when the McDonald's was across the street there, and it wasn't that long ago. It was probably the early 90s, and the guy behind the counter had earrings. I think he was bald too, and I don't know if he had a neck tattoo, but he had facial piercings.
He looked weird, yeah.
Yeah, and I remember thinking, here's McDonald's, the corporate entity, and they've finally said we can't discriminate against this because such a it's become part of these kids' parents don't have a problem with it. They're our customers too. We can't afford to have a problem with it, and that was kind of a real epiphany for me in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
want to spin the first piece of vinyl, and you mentioned the Exploited.
Yeah,
and I want you to talk about the tune we're going to play, and if that was on the first tape that you bought, or if this is...
It wasn't. The first tape I bought was Horror Epics, which would have been the tour that they were on at that time. But this is their second album that I brought. And I just remember a girl in high school, me... To a certain extent, I would try to indoctrinate those around me, right?
Yes.
Try and mold like minds if they weren't like enough already. And going on about the song Alternative. And she was more, and her gang of friends too, they were into alternative music, boot sauce or whatever. And I remember me telling her about it. And going, they probably don't even know what alternative is. But this record's 10 years old at this point, right? Or 8 years old or something like that. And so I always thought that was kind of funny. And I think it's one of their better songs. It was one of the first songs that I covered on a stage, I guess. And I don't know. It's a good one.
You like it. And we're going to get back. We're going to talk about your birth when you started into music business, when you started playing. But in the meantime, we're going to, as Steve Nagus like to say, drop a rock on a piece of plastic and go back old school and listen to some Exploited alternative selection from
Troops of Tomorrow.
Troops of Tomorrow at barbershoppodcast.com.
Together,
exploited. And as per formula, less than 2 minutes, 100 miles an hour, and very angry.
Yeah.
And I like that. And even to this day, we went on Sunday, me and Beth went to the St. Hollywood, and we saw Sonny Vincent. And I tell you, as soon as they started playing, and everything was 100 miles an hour and tight and angry like that, man, it does something. It fires you up.
Yeah.
It fires me up anyway. So you're a young guy at this point in time. You realize that music is more than background music for you. At what point do you decide that I want to start playing guitar, or I want to start singing, or I want to start writing, I want to start being a band? What age, or how did this start for you?
Let me see. Somewhere near the end of high school, maybe grade 12 or something. I already had my buddies, and we'd hang out and stuff, but although we'd talk about music, we didn't really talk about playing music, I don't think. But my one friend Kurt, who is a really good drummer, he's played with me for the Joe Strummer tribute nights several years in a row. I don't know how many, 6 or something. Found out he was a drummer, and that he had been jamming with other friends of mine, just trying to come up with something. And another friend of mine had keyboards, and I think there was already 2 bass players, and I became the 3rd bass player. And the other 2 guys basically gave up, but I didn't. And bass, I chose bass over guitars, because I felt at the time that my fingers were too big or fat. There's too many strings. The bass looks so much simpler, but also I already really liked Sid Vicious and Paul Simonon, and it just kind of sounded tougher, and it was less. I didn't care about the little fiddly bits, although they might sound really cool, but I'm not interested in becoming a professor of music or something. So picked up the bass, and another friend of mine, he might have actually been playing guitar right from the get-go, but eventually it became me bass, this guy Kurt on drums, and my friend John on guitar. And we had our little tail end of high school, and a year or 2 after, a band called Hate Wrench. And
any particular story behind that name?
I didn't make it up. I'm not, to be honest, I don't know where it came from. We eventually made a joke out of it, calling ourselves 8 Wrench, because every riff you were supposed to play it 8 times, and then there was a change. But the other guys, the guitar player, he understood sort of where I was coming from. He wasn't afraid of punk, where the drummer pretty much still is, let alone back then. But they were more into, we hadn't heard of Caius yet, or they hadn't started playing yet, but that kind of stuff, like, it was like stoner rock type stuff. And I would always try and speed things up. The one joke that still gets thrown around every once in a while is, like, I would come up with riffs. That was never a problem for me for whatever reason. But we'd be playing something, and they'd stop and go, Glen, slow down. Okay. But it starts with the bass, so it's up to me. And so then I'd start playing it again, and they just start laughing at me. And I go, what? I go, we said slower, not softer. You're just trying to play it quieter and still sneak the speed in. But I never really played anywhere, just house parties a bunch of times. And really it wasn't until several years later, I would have been 26, when I met Joe Strummer after his concert, and I had already met at the concert these 2 girls One would become my present wife, and the other one was her cousin. And I talked him into meeting me at a bar after the show. And I always thought about being in a bar band or something, but at that point in recent time, it wasn't anywhere near a reality. And so I'd been trying to impress these girls with ideas and songs for my non-existent band. And then it turned out Joe Strummer was in the bar himself. And so we ended up hanging out with him on and off throughout the night. And so he comes over, and at some point in the conversation, these girls start trying to tell him the song ideas that I was telling them, and I go, "No, you're screwing it up." And so I took, straight from the horse's mouth, and he liked it. And the girls are saying, "No, it's like it wasn't.
That's not how it goes.
It wasn't politically correct enough for them, or something, right?" And he said, "No, it's cool. You got to get more serious about your music." And I've talked to a couple older gentlemen since then, older British guys from that scene, and apparently he would do that to everybody. If he talked to any kind of musician who wasn't already giving it their all, then he would be pushing them to try and, you better give it your all. You got to get out there and da-da-da-da-da. Despite the fact I was already, although barely, but I was already a steel worker making good money and whatever. It's not like this is going to be my future. But if Joe Strummer tells me to do something, then I'm going to do it. Yeah. And it was kind of a twofold thing, too, because despite the fact that I'd already been hanging around at the Corktown on and off for, almost 10 years, there was nobody really in the know that was interested in giving you a leg up or something, you had the Vapids and the Rebels and whatever different bands were playing at the time. But if you weren't in a band yourself, then you weren't in that clique and or niche. And so how are we going to... I knew a couple guys, and then we started trying to get this band together. Well, but where can we go practice, or how can we get our first gig, and et cetera, et cetera. And that only happened because I met this girlfriend who would become my wife, and she happened to be Jamie Problem's younger sister from the Problem Children. And so she knew this guy who knew this guy, and so that we were able to get a rehearsal space. And then, we're doing a gig, so-and-so's doing a gig in a couple weeks. Well, we can get you on like first out of 5 bands or something, and sure. And so that's how I was able to get on a stage. If things had worked out a different way, I don't know, you probably never would have heard of me, maybe.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a couple little occurrences in your life that had drastic changes. And,
yeah.
And I think that happens in many cases to a lot of people. Now, you've started playing, and at some point you're in the door. At least you've got the community that you're aware of in Hamilton,
yeah,
that you can draw from. And I know exactly what you're talking about. That there's no advertising agency or government office to help you find these people. It's been a hard scrabble deal getting it, going through it yourself and finding it out.
I tried putting up posters and cheapies and stuff, and didn't really meet with much success. I remember guys from high school, a year younger than me, they were in a band called the Castaways, which how they hooked up with Wet Spot guys, I don't know, but it was these 2 young guys and 2 older guys that were former Wet Spots. And I was hanging around the bass player from the Castaways, which would eventually turn into Razor Eater, and complaining to him that I put these ads out in like cheapies, and I think Dr. Disc was around by that point. and saying the only calls I got were like from these Nazi guys. And the bass player goes, "What's the matter? Not nice enough for you?" So I go, "Okay, well, fine, I'll give it a go." But work schedules never worked out, and it never came to anything. But yeah, it's the pre-internet world where I know, like, you know, you put an ad on Kijiji or go into some kind of chat room or something like that, and you find people like nothing these days. But at that time, like we were talking about when I was a kid and they exploited, I remember grabbing a guy by the lapels and going, "Did they still exist? Do the Exploited still exist? It's been so long since they put out a record." And that record that you played, I remember buying that in Rave Records on King Street and passing over the first pressing for that reissue, because the reissue had a big write-up on it. It had information, where the original just had names and the studio that they did it at and whatever, where I wanted the write-up. I got to learn about this kind of stuff, right? And you just didn't have those kind of vehicles and stuff.
Well, we want to play one more tune off of this album before we go on to some other stuff. But if you had to do the, you know, Dime Store A&R deal for the Exploited, how would you describe the band to the uninitiated? What do you know about them? And how did they fit into that kind of matrix of punk music in Canada, at least?
Well, Waddy is the singer for the Exploited, and like, say, similar to the Rebels, you know, he's the mainstay, and everybody else changes from album to album or over the years, whichever. But how I like to think of it is, because I'm much more into British punk as opposed to American stuff, Johnny Rotten identified the problem. Joe Strummer showed us possibly the answer down the road. Once we get rid of the problem, we just need a revolution. And Waddy, to me, is like the general or the sergeant that you were going to be next to in the trenches or on the barricades or something. This is the guy with the balls. He's got the muscle, and he's going to be the one who's going to make it happen. And he was able to start different riots and stuff back then, and even the odd time now. But unfortunately, it's just a band. But that's how I did, and that's still how I picture him. That he's musical thug, I guess.
Yeah, and England under Thatcher in the early 80s truly was the canary in the coal mine in a lot of ways.
Sure.
We were very insulated over here and kind of understood it. And you can't overestimate the impact that those musicians had on the political landscape.
Yeah.
These words had. Something that, you know, the British music industry has always been very powerful, leading edge, and I think because it's been a revenue generator for such a long period of time.
If there's money to be made, someone's going to put it out.
Someone's going to put it out. So this had some clout, and we're going to hear something off the Exploited called UK 82, the Barber Shop Podcast, done smooth.
Yeah!
You distracted me.
Yeah, they don't have fade outs in punk. You never notice that?
I hate big endings. I want songs to end just like that one did. Bang.
Yeah.
No timers on the album either. The record player.
No
countdown timer like the CD player.
Oh, and I love the thing about vinyl is you had to format it, so it was about 22 minutes a side. So someone had to get off their ass every 22 minutes and decide, is this worthy of another 22 minutes, or are we going to go with something else? Where when you have a playlist, you have to physically punch someone out to get their playlist off, because they'll be more than happy to make you listen to it for 8 hours.
Right, yeah.
Straight. And I think it was pretty democratic with a stack of records, because if you're willing to get off your butt and look through it and pull it out and put it on, then you deserve to have your choice put on at a party, and I think mixtapes,
I used to get leeway. I imagine you guys are similar to me, but like maybe even today, but once upon a time, we're going to sit around and have a 6-pack before we head to the bar. And guys who I'm hanging out with who like stuff that wasn't necessarily mainstream but was closer than what I liked, they would give me some leeway on the stereo at the house before the show, because anywhere I went, they're never going to play anything that I like.
Yeah.
Right.
So you get the early takes.
Yeah. Maybe they'll play a special song. That'd be great.
Yeah.
But
now, where there are a lot of times there's guilty pleasures, and there must be some in your life where bands that had an edge, that maybe they were slightly overproduced and creamy, but these are bands that kind of stuck with you. You thought, you know what, this is a good act. And now, and again, we'll touch on this later. Now that you're in the business where you're promoting music, you have to have an eye for that. Not just what I like, but what other people like.
Right.
Did you find that kind of going through a transition in time? The 80s petered out. They kind of went into the hair band, and then the hair band went into the dirty heroin bands, and then the grunge bands, and people were looking to exploit the youth. They're always looking to exploit the youth.
Sure, yeah.
There's money to be made on the youth. And when record companies are trying to pawn off something as angst,
Yep.
when in fact it's pampered. Did you find that there was anything? Did you find a dry period in your life where it's like, man, I have to either listen to something I liked 15 years ago or do my own music? Or was there always something that you could listen to that you kind of identified with?
Well, I always had my records, right? Like they would be my foundation, I suppose. But yeah, there was definitely a time. Well, and I was always. It would have made more sense if I was maybe 5 years older, because I was coming at things. I was a little bit too much of a Johnny-come-lately for a lot of the punk stuff. Like, too young for first wave, but just a couple years behind second wave.
Yeah, kind of caught in that Gen X of punk music.
Yeah, and so except for metal, which was all over the place when I was a kid, steel-toe work boots and the lumberjackets and stuff. And the other end was like Rick Astley and whatever puffer nonsense.
Yeah. Whitney Houston, whatever was selling.
Yeah. But yeah, I always had my records, and I don't know.
You always found something that you liked in the home front, at least.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you a voracious record collector, or do you just go through periods where it's like, I need to look for something?
I'm not as crazy buying up records as I once was. Basically because I have most of what I want. There are records still out there that I would like to get, but the majority of them are big bucks, and I'll probably never get them unless I come across them by accident. Somebody doesn't know what they have. I don't know how many records I have. I know some guys say, "Oh, I've got 7,000 records. I got 30,000 records." I've never been so bored as to sit around and count my records. So I've got a bunch of milk crates full of records, but how many I have, I don't even want to know.
Yeah, I think they should go by weight. I think it'd be easier if
that
we had
makes
an industrial
more sense.
Scale. We could just weigh our records.
I could fill up the back of a pickup truck probably.
And again, this is a commitment that the youth of today don't understand. And it can be called hassle or it can be called commitment, but you have to lug it and you have to care for it, and you have to even me having 4 or 5 records, they have to go out of the sleeve, in the sleeve. They have to be cared. They have to be, it's like children. You pay attention to them. And people who never collected vinyl don't understand. What's the affair? I mean, it's so heavy, it's cumbersome, it's a pain in the ass. It's like,
it's the way music is meant to be heard, as far like recorded music. I am a little bit on vinyl, but I've put out a couple CDs, and to me it's a little bit depressing because the music companies and modern society has kind of destroyed formats of music. Like, 8-tracks died, cassettes have died, CDs are almost dead. Now we've got like MP3s, and I know there's MP4s. What's going to be 10 years down the road? I don't know. But a vinyl record will last, as long as you take care of it, it could last 1,000 years, right? So that's what I want to be on, and to me, that's real music belongs on vinyl.
And you're also a lover of machines and mechanical things and how they work. So I think that this can't be.
Yeah, digital stinks.
There's
digital anything.
How can you trust something that doesn't have a gear and a cam and a belt and a motor to make it work? Like,
exactly.
I understand the advantages of it, but it became so detached from what music does and how it connects people, and it can be very primal, and it can be very motivational. And having this mechanical machine that reproduces music, I think is kind of that missing little piece.
Like having CD decks that you can scratch. Yes. That's just nonsense. It's just nonsense. You're I hate using the term. I've never liked the term, but you're a poser. You're a loser. You're just pretending. Yeah.
And there's a fair bit of that, but the industry tends to sort that out on its own, doesn't it?
I can't trust the industry to police itself.
No, but
we always lose.
But what I'm talking about is at a local level. This is one of the top 10 largest cities in Canada, and it is still, woefully underrepresented and underfunded, and there's very little attention put on what we have to offer in the way of music and how it is actually tactile and real and has value.
We vote orange, that's why.
Yeah, and then you're always on the outskirts looking in.
That's right. We're the outsiders.
Looking in. I want you to talk a little bit about oi. Tell me about the origins of the word oi and the impact it had on your life and what it's meant to you.
I don't know exactly where the word comes from, but it's just a British way of saying hey or something. When the band Cockney Rejects started out in probably 79, got signed by EMI, third show, big huge record deal, because they were afraid they were going to lose. They let the pistols slip through their fingers, and they were afraid of letting that happen again. So they signed the Cockney Rejects.
And EMI was a very old-fashioned, stayed behind the, Macintosh jacket, gray flannel kind of company.
Right. And so they signed these guys, and basically if you sign them after your third show, you still got a lot of growing to do, no matter how blinkered you might be. But so there was a review of one of their shows, and I think they were referring to the singer Stinky Turner, his stage patter in between songs. And he was a young kid and probably nervous, and he just kept saying "oi" all the time. And so some guy writing the review said, like, you know, not a bad little punk band if he could stop saying "oi." And so then they came out with a song called "Oi, Oi, Oi." But even a little bit before that song came out, it had become, there was a label that got slapped on the skinhead side of second wave British punk. And when I was a kid, I fell in love with the Exploited, and I started learning about different things. But my dad was a pretty hard taskmaster, and there's no way in hell his 14 or 15-year-old son is going to live in his house with a mohawk haircut. So I had to shave my head. And I never did fit in with the skinheads at my school, because that was a big thing in Hamilton in the early 90s, exactly. Late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, people see bald heads today and they don't realize.
Yeah.
You're Mr. Clean or you're a neo-Nazi, you know, back in the days. Or so society perceived you.
Yeah. But like there was, I don't know, say 10 skinhead guys in my high school or something, and but I wasn't interested in or for like 3 months or something, I'm not interested in the swastikas and all that kind of stuff, and that's not what the available vinyl portrayed either. Mm-hmm. Like, of course, I don't know how you would have found it back then in the 80s, but of course there were racist bands, and there are racist bands, but there are left-wing skinhead bands, there's right-wing skinhead bands, there's apolitical skinhead bands, and there's jokey idiot, you know, skinhead bands and whatever. But that was the role that I sort of had to cast myself into in high school. Was I couldn't wear the mohawk, I had the shaved head, I'd still wear the Exploited t-shirts, but and I didn't have any money either. I did have like a stock boy job for a while, but I eventually got fired for stealing cigars. And it wasn't a good time to lose your job. It wasn't easy to find another job. So I had next to no money. The folks would, you know, keep me in clothes that weren't necessarily falling apart, but I could throw $10 or $15 at a pair of suspenders. And I remember breaking the bank, getting my aunt to drive me up to Toronto because you couldn't buy a pair of Doc Martens in Hamilton yet. $110 for my first pair of 10 holes that I wore for a dozen years.
Which, you know, at $12 a year is not a bad deal.
No, yeah. You know. Well, they were British made, not Chinese like today. But yeah, so I grew up as a skinhead guy, and I still like that kind of music. The only problem with that scene is it is the most messed up. I don't think there is another musical genre that has been twisted and turned in so many different ways. Like original skinheads in the late 60s in England, they hung out with rude boys and listened to Jamaican reggae and ska and stuff. And somehow over the years, you know, it turns into all these different factions, and so you've got sharp skinheads and then racist skinheads, and then, you know, everything in between. So you always have to do kind of, if it's a skinhead band, then there's a pinch of salt somewhere. Like, what exactly are these guys like? What are they talking about? But I think there's lots of great music to come out of that scene. It is kind of a smaller scene, so that's why I've kind of passed it by to a certain extent. But I still love it.
It's worked its way into a part of your sound.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, never mind. Okay, we've got a compilation that you brought in here.
Yes, I brought this album, Son of Oi. It's the second Oi comp that I bought from Record World on King Street next to Cheapies, and I would appreciate it if you could play Attila the Stockbroker and the Newtown Neurotics.
All right.
That track. That's such a wicked record. There's poetry in between bands.
There's 12 shots or tracks per side.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff on there, so it's value for money. But there's poetry. There's the styles or heaviness vary pretty widely. There's even like a jokey country song on that album. But I really like the Attila song. The Newtown Neurotics were a band unto their own, and I've heard the original of this track by them, but it's not what I've known over the years, and to me it pales in comparison to this version, where it has Attila the Stockbroker over the top, where he's kind of a solo performer, poet, and whatever, and his rant over top of the music is fantastic. And in a day and age, I don't know, and say 88 or something like that in Hamilton, where if you had a shaved head, 9 times out of 10 you had red laces in your boots. This song helped keep red laces out of my boots.
There you go. Well, I'm going to try to drop it and see how we
get
make
as
out
close
with
as
it.
you get.
Close as you can get. This is what it's like, old school here, listening to some Oi punk with Glen Fallman on barbershoppodcast.com. And you have to say it like that. You know, it has to be.
That would be proper, yes.
That would be the proper oyage. So I want you to touch on the first band that you were with that kind of received a little bit of press, and you got that buzz in the city. You got to play some live gigs on stage.
Yep.
And it was at the same time, I think you were working with Lou at the Raven, weren't you? Or was it at the point, what point did promoting music and being almost an ambassador to music and the Sam Lawrence Five kind of come together?
Right. I'm not a promoter.
You're a supporter.
I'm a supporter. I'm a booster for sure. But only in the very loosest of terms could you call me a promoter. So after Joe Strummer told me I better get on a stage and start telling people about what I'm doing or what it's in my head or something, got a couple guys together and we started this band, Sam Lawrence 5. And first show was at the Corktown. I couldn't tell you the second or the third show or whatever, but we did end up playing the Raven, and that was to do with Lou. I guess he just kind of heard about us or something. The one thing I have to say, like I said about the sort of musicians niche before, I remember walking through the Corktown and people going, Sam, hey, Sam. And I walked by, and after like the fifth time, I turned around, are you talking to me? Yeah. My name's not Sam, but you're Sam Lawrence 5. Oh, yeah. Sam Lawrence was the mayor of Hamilton. It's got a park named after him. I'm not Sam Lawrence. My name's Glen. But anyway.
Fame is a wonderful thing.
Yeah. Maybe I should have left it that way.
But that was a time when you actually said, okay, I can make, get my yayas out. I mean, I think it's really important, especially a guy who's got something to say and something to do, and yet he's working, like you're always working full time, and you've got a lot of
everything else is on the side.
Yeah. So to be able to do music on the side and to do it legitimately on the side is a tough gig.
Right.
Because you know how many people have to do it full time or it can't get done.
Yeah, and I'll revert back to my teenage years again. I heard about the Forgotten Rebels, and I traded this guy a mixtape for his older brother's copy of In Love with the System. And I think the older brother, or somehow I picked up little tidbits of information about them. And they're from Hamilton, which I thought was great. And he like works in a he works in a factory full time, like he's not like a big rock star or anything. And I go, well, okay. And I'd sit there, and I don't know how I've got 5 or 6 copies of that record. I'd never checked to see which one I brought, because my original copy, you could only play like a couple tracks off it because I stepped on it so many times in drunken stupors over the years. But after listening to it for the millionth time, I was thinking, I can write a song about whatever I want. If I've got a day job, I don't have to cater to anyone. I don't care if anybody likes it or not. I get a paycheck coming in anyways. I'm punching a clock.
So it was actually freeing in a lot of ways.
Exactly. And that's how Mickey has always approached his music, I believe. And, like, they have toured, but tours always have to revolve around his work schedule or his holidays or whatever. And that's kind of the way I approach it, too. I got a day job. I got to put food on the table, but I'm not going to sell my soul to do it. I'm going to make music that's going to be salt in the wound for the ruling class. And, that's my soapbox. But for 40 hours a week, to a certain extent, I'm going to keep my head down and power through whatever nonsense I have to make for you.
Yeah.
Whether I used to make soap and now I make steel.
Yeah. Isn't that, I don't know. It's almost too perfect. My dad used to work for P&G.
That's where I used to work, yeah.
And it's funny because they would dry the soap on the roof, and you would drive down Burlington Street, and you would smell the soap, and he would say, he worked in the 60s, and he'd say it would cost so much to kiln dry it, that they would just rotate it, and they would use like the heat and the air of the
Okay.
of the
They weren't
nature.
doing that when I was there.
No, because it's probably, but it was amazing, though, that
But the one department I worked in, because a lot of it was liquid, but the one department where we actually made bar soap, it was lava soap, like mechanic soap.
Mm-hmm.
And it would sit and cure in the room for a month before we would take it out and cut it up and turn it into bars of soap.
But I think that was so ironic and beautiful that as you're driving down this neoclassical dirty part of Hamilton, you would smell soap, and you couldn't see it. You'd have to be there.
Oh yeah,
smell it and go.
And for me, like, I don't know about you driving by, but for me, I remember going by when I was a kid. But when I started there, eventually I used to. But when I started there, I thought it stunk terrible. But what it was they're making 20 different kinds of soap and shampoo and toothpaste and whatever, using whatever different kinds of perfume. And so out on the street, you're getting this mishmash of all these different perfumes and stuff. If you were just standing in the one department, then it smells great or fine, or eventually you don't even notice it. But yeah, going by in the car or something, it's like, what you might as well be going by the soybean factory or something, right? It was terrible.
You do get a lot of great smells,
We used to.
And I guess progress is kind of gauged by the soot and the smell to a certain point. It's like people, there were generations of people who were able to contribute mightily to this town because they had solid, dependable employment, and they put in a good day's work. They created a good product,
sure,
and it functioned and it worked. And I get depressed today when I look at the way it works today, and the way that shareholders' interests take a great deal of precedence over the interests of even your consumers, not even your workers, but the people who buy your fucking shit.
Yep.
And it's kind of lost on the fact that these are people, these are people.
This is our community.
This is our community.
And they only ever, 100 years ago, depending on who you're talking about, there was a certain amount of, like in Canada, these captains of industry, they did care about building a country, and they would send their kids to war, but those days are long gone. Like in any kind of talk about, we want to be a positive member of your community or something, it's all just, everyone knows that it's lip service. And it's just like any kind of politician or whatever. No one believes you. No one believes you. You're just, this is what you're supposed to say, so you're saying it, and we're listening, whatever. You're going to stick it to me as soon as you get the chance.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's actually kind of stripped away any of the legitimacy and the power of debate and discourse, because that was the one, a politician of any stripe who could engage a crowd, who could stand on a soapbox and could share his outrage and his passion, could motivate. And I don't see that at all. I see that if there is someone that good, they're immediately assumed to be a puppet. And
right,
it's like the fact that man or woman actually feels and believes that is very quickly going by the wayside. And there was an interesting study that's done recently where they would put $1, like a whole stack of dollar bills in the lunch fridge in a room, and people would never go in and take $1 and use it in the Coke machine. But if they put a case of Coke in there, slowly people would help themselves to a Coke, because they're not confronted with what they're actually doing. It's kind of got an extra layer in between of, what are you doing? The
degree of separation.
Exactly. And I think that the people who are looking at the bottom line, their financial bottom line, are very aware of this, and again, music, to me is the tip of the point of the spear that you can stick and
In
say
their eye.
in their eye and say, you know what, this is going to open it up. You know,
we're not going to take this anymore.
Because I think it transcends, because it's so primal in our needs
Yep.
and who we are, that as long as music is not co-opted, and trust me, I believe it's been co-opted. To a great extent.
As much as they can.
It's not an accident, that music and inane music with lack of content and lyrics,
That's right.
No one scares them more than someone who's saying something.
The Sex Pistols will never hit number one again.
Yeah.
They'll never let that happen again.
Yeah, it's very easy to make fun of something when you've got something to gain by keeping it ignorant, or keeping the masses ignorant. I want to play some Mickey DeSantis. I want to play some Forgotten Rebels, and they certainly have their place in Canadian musical history. Very proud to have them out of Hamilton. My introduction was Surfing on Heroin, and that was a song that got some play.
The hit single,
The hit single. Was that the case with you, or were you already, like, by the time it did that, you were almost caught between excitement and disappointment that the rest of the world was catching on to them?
Well, I never, like maybe 5 years ago, I might have heard them on the radio, like on college radio or something, but 20 years ago, I never ever heard them on the radio. I got that record, In Love with the System, and I would play it all the way through. And part of me becoming a bass player was I wanted to play bass like that guy. Pogo a Go-Go or Chris Houston / Paul Simonon. They got little fiddly bits and some walking around and stuff. It's not just hitting those same notes like Dee Dee did.
Yeah.
And I was always disappointed whenever I went and saw the Rebels, because whatever bass player they had at the time never played it like they do on the vinyl. And when I finally met Chris Houston, I go, oh yeah, you were that album. That was a big influence on how I wanted to be able to play bass, for sure.
Well, I'm going to spin the first two tracks, because I don't think it's fair to do a minute 50 and then just when people are starting to get into it to pull it out. So we're going to go two songs off of this album, and certainly a shout out to anyone in the Hamilton music community who is watching or listening tonight at barbershoppodcast.com. We've got Glen Fallman in, and we're going to treat you to a little old school Forgotten Rebels on vinyl. barbershoppodcast.com.
Best.
right. The Forgotten Rebels on barbershoppodcast.com. A couple personal selections from Glen Fallman, who's joining us in the studio tonight. Glen, you're a tried and true born blue Hamiltonian, you know.
Black and gold.
Black and gold. You love this town.
Yeah.
And I love this town, too.
It's my team.
It's your team.
I don't. Why would I root for another team?
Exactly. Now you've kind of embodied this in that you've taken on a role as someone who's starting to collect memorabilia, products, things that were exclusively Hamilton. And obviously you looked around and saw no one else was doing it. You know.
I think there are others out there, but they don't necessarily have exactly the same idea in mind. Like I know of a few other steel workers who are buying or have over the years bought old Stelco stuff, and there's local train fanatics who will buy rail related things and that kind of stuff, and that's what I found to a certain extent to make, I call it Hamiltonia, buying. And
this is available, I mean, people can find you on Facebook. Where else?
There's a Facebook page that I made, Hamiltonia. I don't sit on it and put stuff out every day. I just put things on it when I can or feel like it, but
well, it's nice if people know, and if they have something they've been sitting on, if it's a product that says made in Hamilton, and that they love, you know, get a hold of it.
That's the main thing. If it says made in Hamilton, Canada, then that interests me.
It interests Glen, it interests us, so get a hold of us here, because this is something I would love for you when you're an old man to be able to say, I need to donate this to the city, and they'd be forced to put it in a nice.
Well, I hope it becomes a museum before I'm an old man. But the fact that City Hall, whether they pay attention to me or not, that's not going to sway or deter me at all. Yeah, it's got nothing to do with it. But yeah, like I'm a history guy. I've got a history degree, and not that means much, but. One thing Hamilton certainly has is history, and we do have Dundurn Castle and Whitehorn and places like that, but they don't reflect what the city is about at all.
Yeah.
You're picking on one or two rich guys whose houses are still around, and anybody who's from here, depending on how old you are, if not your dad, then your grandpa worked in a factory at some point in time. And the biggest number I've found, I can't attach a year to it, but I know that Hamilton had 700 different factories functioning at the same time. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, even if half of them were little 30-man shops or something, even still, that's just crazy.
Yeah.
Like, what could 700 different factories all be making at the same time? And there's no end. The more you get into it, the more daunting but also interesting it gets. We made cars, we made guns, we made condoms, we made pop, we made diapers, we made toothpaste, we made beer, we made anything and everything.
Yeah, and it wasn't just warehousing and promoting it. We fucking made it.
No, exactly. We made it. We weren't like, we may have become a hub to a certain extent, and that's closer to what we are now, but no, this is where the stuff come from. The stuff come here, we turned it into something, we created the value, and then it got shipped elsewhere, and other people buy what we make.
Yeah. And this is kind of, in a nutshell, what's happened to our whole economy in this country, where we don't make stuff anymore.
I got mad, and she won't do it again. My wife come home with a frozen pizza from the grocery store, Dr. Ocker's frozen pizza. I go, this pizza's from Germany. Why on earth would I buy a frozen pizza from Germany?
Yeah, it's one of the few things we still make.
Like, but how does it, like, it had to come across the ocean.
Yeah. And they can still sell it for $4.
Yeah, it's like, just ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, the scales kind of slid out from under us, but I really appreciate that you are someone who is still steadfast to it. You still write and play about it, and you make Hamilton kind of part of your musical legacy. When you write and when you play, there's always something about Hamilton in it.
Yes.
And the early commercial stuff, Canadian in general, people didn't want to identify themselves as being Canadian because they didn't want to limit themselves, and much more in Hamilton. And frankly, the Forgotten Rebels were kind of like that.
Yep.
Where there was nothing Hamilton specific about them. But we're going to play a tune off of one of their albums.
Yes.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about when,
Well, yeah, I had already been a Rebels fan for some time. The one thing that kind of burned me a little bit about Teenage Head was, if once in a blue moon I ever heard of their name mentioned in the press or on the radio, it was questionable. Were they from Hamilton? Were they from Toronto? Exactly, because maybe you're cooler if you're from Toronto. Yeah. But I love the Rebels, and they were more pistol-y in their stance and more in your face. And then when they released the Untitled album, I believe in '89, the song Evelyn Dick, I love that song because it name-dropped stuff, Hamilton landmark. Evelyn was a girl from the Hamilton Mountain. Her hubby drove a bus around the Gore Park fountain, and I just bounced off the walls when I heard that. I go, that's what I want. I want Hamilton songs. We have to sing. I want to sing about Shorty Green fountains. I want to sing about the Gore Park fountain. I want to sing about, Amstel or Lakeport Brewery or Stelco, or let's sing about the Tie Cats and anything and everything that is us. And, we got to toot our own horn because nobody else is going to.
Yeah, and I think if we toot it loud enough and clear enough, that people will get the message.
Might finally get the message. Yeah,
exactly. And this is a center of world-class music. It's not something that somebody decrees upon you. It's something that we
kick ass, and there's nothing they can do about it.
Exactly. So we're going to drop something from the Forgotten Rebels, and it is, and this is a bit of a blind eye, but this is the Evelyn Dick, who, she got around. She killed some kids.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a Hamilton thing. Look it up.
Shit happens.
Google it. Evelyn Dick. BarbershopPodcast.com. Let's hope we're even close. No.
That don't sound like it.
Well, failing that at the best possible time, vinyl will return. And I'm happy that Dr. Disc and whatnot has the ability to continue to sell vinyl. And I thought it was great when the owner was interviewed. And he said, if you'd have told me 20 years ago that vinyl would be my savior,
right,
I thought you're fucking nuts. Right?
Well, you got Hammer City and Crash Landing too.
Yeah, and they are great outlets, and struggling, against the corporate entity.
Exactly.
And they'll come in if you're an author or you're someone who's producing original music. That's the kind of place that you can go to, and they'll help you out. Well, I'm going to try to drop it again on the fourth track, which is going to be, I don't know, it looks to be about that one. If this lands, it's going to be a miracle. Evelyn Dick, BarbershopPodcast.com.
Some kids playing doctor, out of the sack. Start playing with the kids, but they didn't put them back. She took the songs, she cut out his head. Took the songs, she cut out his way. Took the songs, she cut out his head. Why did you do this? This is Evelyn Dick. How did you? This is Dick. Stairs in jail, and the bull-back bars with the nice stick nail. They didn't pick a movie, wrote a book instead. You can read it in your lover every night before bed. She took the songs, she cut out his arms. Took the songs, she cut out his legs. Took the songs, she cut out his head. Why did you do this?
Evelyn Dick.
It's a punk song. It's short.
It's a short punk song, and I don't know what it is because you get the same amount of time. It's not like punks say, okay, I'm only going to do a minute and a half songs. I'm going to do 6 of them. They do 60, in a row. And the time in between is also very short.
Don't want to hear you noodling forever.
No. Or talking,
People got stuff to do.
Yeah, and when they go on, it's like they finish a song, and it's like they might count into the next song or just start immediately, and I love that, I want to talk about what you're doing now musically. You've got a new outfit called Steeltown Spoilers.
Yeah.
Who are you playing with, and what kind of shit are you doing?
We're surprisingly, we've actually been around for probably 6 or 7 years now. And when I ended Sam Lawrence 5, I kind of felt that I still had stuff in me that I wanted to get out. I figured these guys, I don't know, I think I tired them out kind of. And I got to go in some kind of different direction, a bit harder, and get this one last gasp of musical creativity out of me somehow. And so that turned into the Spoilers. Tried lots of different drummers. Scotty Vapid is the fastest. Originally had who I thought was the fastest guitar player in town, Robo DeGrunt, but and he played with us for a year or so, but quit, and unfortunately has passed on. But in a way, it was a blessing that he quit, because then Mark Hammer, my bass player, who I won't say it again, but he's a very competent bass player.
He's not a frustrated guitar player.
No, he knows his stuff. But through him, that's how we got Chris Crash to come in on guitar.
Who is a long-time Hamilton?
First time on vinyl, 81.
Yeah, I mean, he's if you have the real deal in the dictionary, Chris Crash has his fucking picture right there, right?
Oh yeah. I was partially afraid of him when I first met him way back when, long before the Spoilers, but he's kind of better now. But when we got him on guitar, then we got to speed up even more. And if you've got the talent or the skill or whatever to play, I don't know, what NXS or somebody is playing at regular speed, if you can do that at 45 or 78 speed, then do it.
Yeah.
And that's what we do.
Yeah. And I imagine that it's probably kind of cathartic for you at this point in time. Do you look at it as... Well,
yeah. It somewhat gets out my frustrations, I suppose, to an extent.
But also builds your frustration.
But yeah. And I'm also trying to preach to people, too. Not to follow me or anything, but maybe to wake people up to a certain extent. And that we are our own tribe. I'm not a big football fan, but I'll go to Ticats games anyway, just to support. And I really dislike people, Hamiltonians, rooting for the Leafs, because Toronto are the ones who are keeping us from getting an NHL team. So don't root for the Leafs. Don't root for the Blue Jays. To hell with Toronto. We're from Hamilton. Exactly. Argos suck. How can 1 minute you say Argos suck, but you've got like a Maple Leafs jersey on?
Yeah,
that doesn't make any sense. And again, I touched on it before. The more you go into Hamilton's past, the more there is. There is so much meat on that bone. I was a huge hockey nut as a kid growing up, and my parents would take me to the library, and I'd grab these hockey books. And so I read like Gordie Howe books and Andy Bathgate books and all this kind of stuff. And I don't know, I was 10 or 12. when I came across the fact that Hamilton had an NHL team.
Yeah.
And lots of grown-ups today still don't know that.
Yeah.
And my grandfather was still around, and I mentioned it to him. He'd be over 100 if he was still alive today. And I go, can you tell me anything about when Hamilton had an NHL team? He goes, oh, yeah, I used to go to the forum. I used to go watch games. I was buddies with Shorty Green, who was the captain of the team. And now, as an adult, and I do the math, well, my grandpa would have been a little kid, and this guy was an NHLer.
So buddies is his term.
But maybe he let you carry his sticks or something. Which is cool anyway, right?
Sure.
That's still cool. We have had it all, and
there's no reason why we can't have it again.
that's the whole thing. Maybe we've let it slip through our fingers a bit, but why can't we have it again? I don't see why not.
The time is done for anyone else to define what this town is. It's time for this town to define itself.
That's right.
And let everyone else discover it. Want to play a tune from the Steeltown Spoilers? Tell us what we're going to listen to.
I don't know.
You don't know? Well, why don't we play it, and then we'll know. All right. From barbershoppodcast.com, Glen Fallman and the Steeltown Spoilers.
In the final analysis, it is the great industries which have placed Hamilton in the industrial foreground. For here, in the solid acreage of plants and towering steel mechanisms, is eloquent evidence of Canada's productive power. Here, in the fire, smoke, and thunder of 1,000 moving forces, men toil and sweat for a brighter Canada and a better world.
Hamilton as fuck, and that pretty well sums it up, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the name of the song, and that's the feeling of this show. And
When people ask me if I'm from Hamilton, I say very.
very much so. And I'm really glad you came on the show today because, for someone who loves Hamilton music and loves this town and what's going on in this town, I'm really glad that you found some time to come in.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Share your background, your knowledge, your bringing up in the music business, what you're doing now. Keep doing it. And,
Thank you.
Thanks for coming out.
One day, you could maybe make a mini-series about me.
One day, we will make a mini-series, and you'll be watching it. Thanks for coming out, you two. BarbershopPodcast.com every week. Next week, check out Brad McDonald, Mackinac. He's on the show. Sure to be another great one. Take care.
See you.
Cheers.
I'm the puff of smoke coming from the grass, you will know to hit you till you see the man on Jackie's dress. Cadillac heading up over the ride. There's a kind of truth in my life that I'm doing what needs doing.